It's funny, isn't it? When we think about strategy, we often picture these, elaborate plans, right? Packed with huge ambitions and like really lofty goals.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But what if, I don't know, what if truly good strategy kind of like blindsides the competition? Like
Yeah,
it's the thing they just don't see coming at all.
right.
Our source today, Richard Rumelt's Good Strategy, Bad Strategy, actually says that good strategy is unexpected. So let's dive into that a bit.
Okay, yeah. What we're doing today is taking a deep dive into some excerpts from Rumelt's work,
Yeah.
and we're really going to try to understand the core of what makes good strategy.
Right.
But just as important, we want to understand what often gets, dressed up as strategy,
Mm-hmm.
but it really falls short. So you can think of this as your shortcut to understanding what truly gives an edge.
And we've got a pretty fascinating array of examples to unpack for you today, from historical military masterstrokes to pivotal business turnarounds,
Oh,
and even some cautionary tales of like plans that totally crashed and burned.
right.
We're here to really extract the crucial insights, those surprising nuggets of wisdom that can give you a fresh perspective.
Yeah, and to guide our exploration, we'll start by looking at real-world examples of both effective and ineffective strategies.
Mm.
Then we'll dissect the essential ingredients that make a strategy work. We'll identify the common traps that lead to strategic missteps.
Yeah,
And finally, we'll explore how you can actually pinpoint and leverage your own unique advantages.
sounds good.
So get ready to think differently about strategy.
I love it. So let's start by getting a clear picture of what good strategy actually looks like. And maybe even more importantly for you, what it's absolutely not.
Okay.
Our first example takes us back to 1805 and the Battle of Trafalgar.
Ooh,
I
Trafalgar.
love it.
So what's fascinating here is Lord Nelson's approach. At that time, the standard naval tactic involved opposing fleets sailing in parallel lines.
Yeah.
And, they were exchanging fire from the cannons along their sides. These were known as broadsides.
Mm.
But Nelson had a truly insightful and, yes, unexpected idea. He broke the British fleet into two columns and sailed them directly, perpendicularly into the Franco-Spanish line.
Wow, that sounds incredibly risky.
Yeah,
Those leading British ships were basically putting themselves in a super vulnerable position.
they were. But Nelson had made a crucial diagnosis. He believed that the less experienced Franco-Spanish gunners would struggle to operate their cannons in the heavy swell of that day.
Okay.
And while he didn't write it down as such, his guiding policy was very clear: to disrupt the enemy's formation and exploit their vulnerability.
Yeah.
And the coherent action was that perpendicular attack. The
Huh.
result,
Big win.
a decisive British victory. The British lost 0 ships, while the French and Spanish lost 22. So this unexpected move secured British naval dominance for over a century. A key insight here is that sometimes the most effective strategy is the one your competitor simply doesn't see coming,
It makes sense.
even if the elements of it aren't entirely novel.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah.
It's like they had all the pieces there, but they just didn't see it coming together like that.
They weren't expecting it. Talk about an unexpected gamble that paid off massively. Now, let's jump forward a couple of centuries
Okay.
to a situation that went, the complete opposite way. Let's talk about Lehman Brothers under Richard Fulton.
Ah, Lehman Brothers. Yes. This is a prime example of ambition being mistaken for strategy.
Oh, yeah.
Leading up to the 2008 financial crisis, even with clear warning signs emerging in the U.S. housing market, Fulton's strategy, and I use that term loosely, was formalized in 2006. And it was simply to aggressively increase their share of the market. And they did this by taking on more and more risk, even engaging in deals that their competitors were turning down.
Right. So they were going all in, increasing their risk appetite, as they called it.
Mhm.
And I mean, they were operating with very, very little capital in reserve.
Exactly. A good strategy would have acknowledged those growing challenges and would have outlined, specific methods to manage that increased risk.
Mhm.
But Lehman's approach was pure ambition. It was just this desire for rapid growth, but without a coherent plan to handle the inherent dangers. And as you know, the consequences were disastrous. Their collapse in 2008 triggered a global financial meltdown. It really highlights Rumelt's point. Simply having ambitious goals is not a strategy.
Right?
There needs to be a realistic plan to achieve those goals while managing risk.
I mean, that makes perfect sense, but I feel like so many organizations fall into that trap.
Oh, absolutely. It's a very common mistake,
Yeah.
and it can be very costly.
So just aiming for massive growth without a solid plan clearly doesn't work. But Sometimes, surprisingly, shrinking down can be a very effective strategy. Let's look at Steve Jobs' return to Apple in the late 90s.
Yeah.
Apple was in deep, deep trouble at that point. What did he do?
It's fascinating to consider how much of Jobs' turnaround strategy seemed like, fundamental business principles.
Hmm.
Business 101, as Rumeld calls it.
Right,
Yet, it was largely unexpected at the time.
right.
So instead of trying to develop a multitude of new and innovative products or making some grand acquisition, he did something that seems almost obvious in hindsight. He drastically reduced the size and scope of the company.
He went into hardcore Marie Kondo mode on Apple.
Precisely. He slashed the number of desktop computer models from 15 down to just one.
Wow.
All portable and handheld models were cut back to a single laptop. He eliminated printers and other peripheral devices. He even significantly cut back on both engineering and software development efforts.
Wow.
Their distribution channels were drastically reduced, and many retailers were cut off. And he outsourced virtually all of their manufacturing to Taiwan.
It sounds brutal,
It does.
but clearly it worked.
It did. By simplifying their product line and shifting manufacturing to Asia, he dramatically reduced their inventory. He also launched a direct-to-consumer web store, cutting out the costs associated with intermediaries.
That's smart.
And he even managed to secure a crucial $150 million investment from Microsoft.
Wow. How did he swing that?
By strategically leveraging Microsoft's concerns about potential action from antitrust regulators at the DOJ.
Oh, interesting.
So they feared a less competitive market. What's remarkable is that these actions, while fundamental, were not what many expected.
Right.
It was an unexpected application of core business principles that ultimately saved Apple. So sometimes the most surprising and effective strategy is simply focusing on the essentials
Yeah.
and executing them exceptionally well.
It's almost like sometimes the most unexpected strategy is just doing the basics really, really well.
Yeah.
And with like a huge sense of focus.
Right.
Speaking of surprising effectiveness, let's jump to the first Gulf War. Operation Desert Storm.
Oh, yeah. Desert Storm.
The ground war was incredibly swift. What was the underlying strategy there?
Again, we see an element of the unexpected. General Schwarzkopf's, what they called the Combined Arms Left Hook maneuver, largely caught the Iraqi forces by surprise.
Right.
So after a month of air bombardment, the coalition forces launched a rapid and intense ground assault, integrating tanks, infantry, attack helicopters, and bombers. And they attacked the Iraqi forces from an unexpected direction in the west.
And it was incredibly decisive, right? The ground war only lasted about 100 hours.
Exactly. The Iraqi Republican Guard, while they put up some resistance, they just weren't able to react quickly enough to the speed and intensity of the attack coming from their flank.
Yeah.
And crucially, to understand the wider context here, Saddam Hussein, fearing a potential U.S. nuclear response, he instructed his commanders not to use chemical weapons, which, of course, could have inflicted massive casualties on the coalition forces.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other layer to it, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Wow.
The speed of the victory surprised many.
It did.
Pundits, who had been predicting prolonged trench warfare, suddenly claimed the coalition had used excessive force.
Wow.
So it was seen as this brilliant, almost secret plan. But here's an interesting twist. It was actually based on pretty standard U.S. Army doctrine.
Really?
So what's fascinating here is at the core of the strategy, this what they call the envelopment maneuver, where they attack the enemy's flank to bypass their main defenses, was actually well established in the Army's field manuals, specifically FM 100-5, which served as the Army's fundamental guide to warfare. It described envelopment as the most critical form of offensive maneuver, so their primary approach. So the brilliant and secret strategy was in fact rooted in existing doctrine. Yet its specific application in this theater of operations was perceived as surprising and highly effective. It underscores that sometimes a well-understood principle applied in a novel context can be incredibly powerful.
It's like they took something that was already there, understood it deeply, and applied it in a way that their opponent didn't anticipate.
Exactly. They saw the opportunity that others missed.
So this kind of leads us to another really crucial point that Rumelt makes. Good strategy often involves saying no.
Precisely. Having numerous conflicting goals and spreading your resources too thinly often leads to ineffective strategy. While very large and wealthy organizations might be able to temporarily sustain this, it rarely produces truly good outcomes. Good strategy demands a sharp focus,
Hmm.
which means leaders must be willing to reject many potential actions and accommodate fewer competing interests. What an organization chooses not to do is just as vital as what it does do. This focus is something to really keep in mind in your own endeavors.
So focus and the willingness to say no are key. Now let's kind of shift gears here and talk about where good strategy can originate, the sources of advantage and insight. And the book uses a classic story to kind of illustrate this, David and Goliath.
Ah, yes. The story of David and Goliath. It perfectly illustrates how our initial perceptions of strength and weakness can be very deceiving. On the surface, Goliath possessed all the apparent advantages. Immense size, heavy armor, extensive combat experience.
Right.
David was merely a young shepherd boy. King Saul even offered David his own armor,
Yeah.
which David quickly declined because he knew it would hinder his movement.
So he had a clear understanding of his own capabilities.
Exactly. David's strength wasn't in brute force,
Hmm.
but in his agility and his proficiency with a sling, a weapon capable of delivering a precise and impactful force over a distance. Goliath's seemingly impenetrable armor had a critical vulnerability. His forehead was unprotected.
Right.
David's unexpected strength effectively neutralized Goliath's apparent advantages,
Hmm.
and he expertly exploited that crucial weakness. The key lesson here is that strategy is about bringing relative strengths to bear against relative weakness, and that sometimes those strengths and weaknesses aren't as obvious as they initially appear. It requires looking beyond the surface.
It's about looking beyond the obvious. Another excellent example of this is Walmart's early success compared to Kmart. Both eventually adopted similar technologies, but their overarching strategies were quite different.
Yeah, this is a great example. What's insightful here is that both Walmart and Kmart began using barcode scanners at their checkout registers around the same time in the early 1980s.
Yeah.
For most retailers, the primary perceived benefit of this technology was cost savings from not having to manually change price tags.
Right.
However, Walmart went significantly further. They invested heavily in developing their own satellite-based information systems, so communication networks using satellites to transmit data across their vast network.
So it wasn't just about scanning groceries faster.
No, not at all. Walmart used the data they collected from these scanners to fundamentally optimize their entire inbound logistics system, so the flow of goods from suppliers to their stores. They also shared this data with their suppliers in exchange for better prices, creating a powerful feedback loop and a substantial cost advantage. Kmart, while implementing the same basic scanning technology, didn't leverage it in this comprehensive strategic manner. Walmart recognized a deeper potential in the information and built an entire system around it, which significantly contributed to their eventual market dominance. This shows the power of seeing beyond the obvious application of a technology.
They recognized a hidden power in that information. Speaking of hidden power, the book discusses the U.S. strategy against the Soviet Union in the 1970s as conceived by Marshall and Roche. It wasn't about direct military confrontation in every area.
No, it was a more nuanced, yet incredibly effective strategy rooted in understanding the relative strengths of the U.S. and the weaknesses of the Soviet Union. So Marshall and Roche's idea, which was articulated in 1976, was surprisingly straightforward.
Okay.
The U.S. should actively compete with the Soviet Union, strategically using its strengths to impose disproportionate costs, and complicate the Soviet Union's ability to compete across various domains.
So it wasn't simply about matching them tank for tank or missile for missile.
Exactly. They focused on areas where the U.S. held a clear advantage, such as more accurate missile technologies and the rapidly expanding technology gap, particularly in the development of integrated circuits. So, miniaturized electronic circuits on a single semiconductor chip.
Right.
They also pursued policies designed to put pressure on the Soviet economy, such as forward deployment of missiles in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
President Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI,
Right.
and even efforts to keep global oil prices relatively low, which limited the Soviet Union's access to crucial foreign currency. Additionally, the Soviet Union's centrally planned economic system hampered its ability to access and integrate Western technological advancements. Their prolonged involvement in the war in Afghanistan further strained their already limited resources. It was this indirect, competitive logic, strategically leveraging U.S. strengths to exploit Soviet vulnerabilities and create unsustainable economic, political, and military pressures that ultimately contributed to the Soviet Union's decline.
Yeah.
It was the terrible simplicity, as Rumelt calls it, of uncovering and utilizing hidden power within the existing situation. This illustrates that understanding your relative strengths and your competitors' weaknesses is fundamental to crafting effective strategy.
It's all about understanding your strengths, identifying your opponent's weaknesses, and then creatively applying your advantages to exploit those weaknesses. Now that we've kind of examined examples of good strategy and where those advantages can stem from, let's delve into what Rumelt calls the kernel of good strategy.
Okay, the kernel.
What are the absolutely essential components?
According to Rumelt, every sound strategy has a kernel comprising three essential elements: a diagnosis, a guiding policy, and a set of coherent actions. Think of it as a three-legged stool. If any one of these legs is missing or weak, the entire structure of the strategy is unstable and likely to fail.
Okay, so let's break down each of those components. What's the crucial role of the diagnosis?
The diagnosis is about clearly understanding the situation you are facing. It goes beyond simply listing facts. It involves naming and categorizing the key challenges, simplifying the inherent complexity, and defining a specific domain for action.
Okay.
A good diagnosis replaces the overwhelming complexity of reality with a more manageable narrative that highlights the critical aspects. And importantly, a strategic diagnosis, unlike a social science diagnosis, which aims to predict outcomes, focuses on identifying leverage points,
Right.
specific areas where you can actually exert influence and change the situation.
The book provides an interesting example related to K-12 education. Right. How factors like social class might correlate with performance. But organizational structure is something that policymakers can actually influence.
Exactly. While research might indicate a strong correlation between student performance and socioeconomic factors, those are often very difficult for policymakers to directly address in the short term. However, Bill Auchi's diagnosis framed the challenge as one of organizational structure, proposing that more decentralized school systems tend to perform better. Whether that specific diagnosis is universally correct is less important strategically than the fact that school organization is a lever that can be directly manipulated through policy changes. That's the power of a strategic diagnosis. It identifies a pathway for effective action.
All right, so you diagnose the problem to pinpoint a leverage point.
Right.
What comes next in the kernel? That's the guiding policy, right?
Yes. The guiding policy is the overarching approach you'll take to address the challenges identified in your diagnosis. It creates advantage by anticipating how others will react to your actions, by reducing ambiguity within your own organization, by focusing your efforts on the most pivotal aspects of the situation, and by ensuring that all subsequent actions are coherent and mutually reinforcing. Think of it as a compass that keeps everyone in your organization moving in the same strategic direction.
The book uses Lou Gerstner's policy of provide customer solutions at IBM as a key example.
Yes.
How did that work in practice?
Gerstner's policy, while seemingly simple on the surface, was absolutely crucial in redirecting IBM. It leveraged IBM's deep technological expertise, but also resolved a significant amount of internal uncertainty about how the company should compete and how its various divisions should be organized. It initiated the process of focusing IBM's vast resources on understanding and meeting the specific needs of their customers, rather than simply pushing their existing products. It provided a clear guiding principle that influenced decision-making across the entire organization.
And the example involving Stephanie's Corner grocery store really brings this concept down to a relatable level.
It does.
Doesn't it? All those decisions she faced, pricing, offering organic produce, setting store hours, she needed a guiding policy to make consistent choices that align with her overall goal.
Precisely. Without a clear guiding policy, Stephanie would likely be making ad hoc decisions. And they might even contradict each other, leading to confusion for her customers and inefficiency in her operations. However, a clear policy such as focus on serving the local college student population with affordable staples and extended late-night hours would provide her with a consistent framework for evaluating all those different options and ensuring her actions are aligned. This shows how a guiding policy brings clarity and consistency to decision-making.
So we've got the diagnosis and guiding policy.
Right.
The final piece of the kernel is coherent actions. What exactly are those?
Coherent actions are the specific steps and initiatives you undertake that are designed to implement the guiding policy and directly address the diagnosed problem. For them to be truly coherent, they must be coordinated and work together synergistically rather than being a disjointed collection of random activities.
Okay.
Rumelt emphasizes that effective strategy often involves imposed coordinated action, meaning it frequently requires a degree of centralized authority and decision-making
Right.
to overcome natural inertia or conflicting interests within a system,
Mm.
and to ensure everyone is working towards the same objectives.
So it's not necessarily about fully decentralized decision-making in this strategic context, even though that can be more efficient in, other operational areas.
That's a crucial distinction.
Yeah.
While decentralized decision-making can be highly efficient for routine operations and fostering local innovation, strategic coordination often necessitates a central driving force
Mm-hmm.
to ensure that all parts of the organization are aligned and moving in the same strategic direction.
I see.
The book uses Toyota's significant investment in hybrid technology as a compelling example of coherent actions in support of a guiding policy.
So, how so?
Their diagnosis was that pressures for greater fuel economy in vehicles would steadily increase over time due to environmental concerns and resource limitations.
Mm-hmm.
Their guiding policy was to establish themselves as the leader in environmentally friendly and fuel-efficient vehicle technology.
Mm-hmm.
And their coherent actions included investing over $1 billion in research, development, and manufacturing capabilities for hybrid technology,
Wow.
encompassing everything from specialized transmissions and advanced microchips to complex control software. They even strategically anticipated that other automakers would eventually need to license their hybrid technology,
Mm-hmm.
further solidifying Toyota's competitive advantage.
Oh, smart.
All of their actions were directly aligned with their diagnosis of the future and their overarching guiding policy. This illustrates the power of aligning your actions with your understanding of the challenges and your chosen strategic direction.
Another insightful example was Harold Williams' strategy for the Getty Trust. I mean, he had vast financial resources at his disposal.
He did. With such significant funding, he could have simply focused on acquiring more art or providing grants to artists and institutions.
Mm-hmm.
However, his guiding policy was more profound, to fundamentally transform the study of art. His coherent actions involved strategically investing in research initiatives, educational programs, and conservation efforts, all meticulously focused on achieving that broader objective and creating a more lasting and significant impact than simply accumulating art or distributing funds.
And President Kennedy's ambitious moon mission serves as another classic example of a strategically sound proximate objective.
Absolutely. The proximate objective of successfully landing a person on the moon by the end of the 1960s was undeniably ambitious. Yet it was also feasible given the existing and rapidly advancing knowledge in rocketry and spaceflight at the time. It directly addressed the critical strategic imperative of surpassing the Soviet Union in the space race, as clearly articulated in Wernher von Braun's memo. Furthermore, it was a highly specific and measurable objective, which effectively galvanized action across various government agencies and private contractors, resolving a significant amount of ambiguity about the immediate goals.
That point about resolving ambiguity is really insightful. The early surveyor missions before the manned landings played a crucial role in helping NASA understand the actual composition and characteristics of the moon's surface.
Precisely. In the early stages of the Moon program, there was considerable uncertainty about whether the lunar surface was solid enough to support a landing spacecraft. Theories ranged from a hard, rocky surface to one composed of soft, fine dust. The Surveyor unmanned missions provided critical data and visual confirmation of the moon's surface, directly resolving that ambiguity and allowing engineers to focus their design efforts on a landing module that would function effectively in the actual lunar environment.
So it's about taking a strong initial position and simultaneously creating future options, especially in dynamic and uncertain situations. Much like the analogy of a skilled chess master making a move that not only improves their current position,
Yes.
but it also opens up possibilities for subsequent moves.
Exactly. It's akin to a helicopter pilot who has thoroughly mastered the fundamental skills of flying. Only after achieving that mastery can they then concentrate on executing more complex and demanding maneuvers,
Right,
such as landing on a small, moving ship in rough seas.
right.
That layering of foundational capabilities is also crucial within organizations. You must have a firm grasp of the basic flying, your core competencies, before you could effectively pursue more complex and ambitious strategic objectives.
And sometimes, even if most of the elements in a complex system are functioning well, a single weak link can undermine the entire system's performance, as tragically illustrated by the Challenger Space Shuttle O-ring disaster.
That perfectly illustrates the concept of chain-link systems. The overall performance of such a system is ultimately limited by the strength and reliability of its weakest link. In the case of the Challenger, no amount of improvement in other areas, such as guidance systems or astronaut training, could compensate for the failure of a single, seemingly minor component, the faulty O-ring. Marco Tonelli's successful turnaround strategy for his struggling Lombardy Machine Company provides an excellent real-world example of how to effectively address these chain link issues.
He strategically focused sequentially on improving product quality first, then sales competence, and finally cost efficiency, correct?
Precisely. He meticulously diagnosed the critical bottlenecks within his company's operations, and then launched highly focused initiatives to address each one in a specific order. He understood that attempting incremental improvements across all areas simultaneously would likely be ineffective. He needed to fix the fundamental foundational issues first,
Right.
to enable progress in other areas. By taking personal leadership and consistently maintaining focus on the overarching objective of a turnaround, he was able to overcome the limitations imposed by the chain-link system and successfully revitalize the company.
It's a fascinating look at how all these interconnected pieces of good strategy come together. Now we've spent a good amount of time exploring the principles of good strategy. Let's kind of flip the coin here and delve into the often encountered realm of bad strategy. What are some of the common pitfalls that lead organizations astray?
Unfortunately, bad strategy is far more prevalent than good strategy in the real world.
Yeah, it does feel that way
It
sometimes.
really does. One of the primary underlying causes is a fundamental failure to accurately identify and thoroughly analyze the actual obstacles that an organization faces in achieving its goals. Instead, what you often encounter being presented as strategy are merely stretch goals, financial budgets, or aspirational wish lists. The example of McCardle's tenure at Harvester perfectly illustrates this dangerous substitution. He managed to improve reported profits in the short term by aggressively cutting overhead costs. But he completely failed to address the fundamental competitive challenges facing the company, and ultimately led it into a massive and irreversible collapse. So remember, simply setting ambitious targets does not constitute a strategy.
So just aiming for ambitious goals without a concrete plan isn't a strategy in itself.
Not at all. Setting ambitious goals can certainly be motivating, but without a clear and realistic understanding of the specific challenges you need to overcome, and a coherent plan outlining exactly how you will overcome them, it remains simply wishful thinking. The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, offers a stark contrast in its strategic approach. DARPA's strategy includes very specific policies that are based on a realistic appraisal of the inherent obstacles to fostering innovation, such as implementing term limits for program managers to prevent bureaucratic inertia and maintaining limited overhead to avoid the development of entrenched organizational interests that could stifle truly novel ideas.
Right.
These are concrete, actionable steps designed to directly address identified obstacles to innovation, not just vague aspirations for it.
So it's about having those really specific and actionable plans.
Exactly.
Another common pitfall seems to be relying heavily on motivational slogans and the power of positive thinking, the will to win, without any underlying strategic insight or concrete plans, much like Chad Logan's so-called 2020 plan.
Chad Logan's 2020 plan, which essentially boiled down to exhorting the organization to keep pushing until we achieve our goals, is a classic example of bad strategy that heavily relies on motivational rhetoric rather than well-defined actions and insightful analysis.
Yeah.
His overemphasis on the will to win unfortunately echoes the futile and tragically costly pushes of World War I, such as the Battle of Passchendaele, where immense determination and sacrifice resulted in horrific losses without achieving any significant strategic objectives. The far more effective approach is to conduct a rigorous analysis of your target customers, your competitors' strengths and weaknesses, and the evolving conditions of the broader business environment to identify genuinely promising opportunities that you can strategically pursue.
Yeah.
Sheer motivation alone will not provide you with a sustainable competitive advantage.
And then there's what the book aptly terms fluff. Those impressive-sounding words, overly abstract language, and grand slogans that give the superficial appearance of strategic thinking, but lack any real substance or concrete direction.
Fluff is indeed a significant red flag indicating the presence of bad strategy. It employs vague and abstract language, often incorporating popular business buzzwords, to create the illusion of strategic thinking without actually articulating anything specific about how the organization will overcome its challenges or achieve its stated objectives. The examples provided in the book, such as the U.S. government's nebulous effort to convince enemies about the dangers of weapons of mass destruction, or the similarly vague and aspirational visions articulated by NEC and the CIA, perfectly illustrate this phenomenon.
Yeah.
These statements are full of impressive-sounding phrases, but lack any clear plan of action or any genuine insight into the complexities of the situations they're addressing.
It's almost like a smokescreen intended to conceal the absence of any actual strategic thought.
It can be, yes.
And then there's the problem of what the book calls template-style strategy, the practice of mechanically filling in predefined sections of a strategic planning document without engaging in any deep or critical analysis.
Template-style strategy involves the rote completion of standardized strategic frameworks, such as defining a vision statement, a mission statement, and core values, without undertaking the rigorous work of truly understanding the unique challenges and opportunities facing the specific organization.
Right.
The pursuit of achieving universal buy-in across the organization often signals this type of superficial strategy development, because making difficult strategic choices will inevitably create some degree of disagreement or opposition. If everyone readily agrees with the stated strategy, it likely indicates that no truly tough choices have been made or any significant strategic direction has been established.
And the book also touches on the potential dangers of new thought and the over-reliance on positive mental attitude as a substitute for sound strategic planning and execution.
The New Thought movement, with its strong emphasis on the power of positive thinking and visualization, can unfortunately lead to bad strategy if it supplants a realistic and objective assessment of existing challenges and the necessity for concrete, well-executed actions. Attributing the historical success of highly innovative companies like Ford and Apple solely to the power of their leaders' visions, while completely disregarding the crucial roles of their underlying technical competencies, effective operational execution, and often a significant element of luck, is a dangerous distortion of reality. While maintaining a positive attitude within an organization can certainly be beneficial, it is absolutely not a viable substitute for a coherent and well-articulated guiding idea that effectively integrates a thorough diagnosis of the situation, a clear and actionable guiding policy, and a set of truly coherent actions. The example of Digital Equipment Corporation, or DEC, where different senior executives proposed fundamentally conflicting strategies based on their individual perspectives of the industry's core, powerfully illustrates the critical need for a unified and coherent strategic approach grounded in a shared understanding of the business realities.
So consistently avoiding the hard intellectual work of rigorous analysis and making difficult strategic choices seems to be a major underlying driver of bad strategy across many different contexts. Now let's transition to a more constructive aspect.
Okay.
The significant power of design in formulating effective strategy.
Strategy, at its core, can be effectively viewed as a form of design. The intentional and thoughtful creation of order and coherence within a complex and often chaotic environment to achieve a specific desired outcome. My own early professional experience as a systems engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, working on the groundbreaking Voyager mission to explore the outer planets, really brought this concept to life for me.
Cool.
The entire mission was an intricate exercise in the coordinated design of numerous interconnected subsystems that had to function flawlessly together across vast distances and over extended periods.
It's like all the different parts of an organization have to be carefully designed to seamlessly fit together and function in a coordinated manner to achieve the overall strategic objectives.
Exactly. And you'll often observe that highly successful strategic upstarts, the new entrants that disrupt established industries, frequently employ tightly crafted and meticulously integrated sets of actions and policies from their very inception. Consider examples such as Canon's initial challenge to Xerox in the copier market by focusing on reliable desktop models, Microsoft's early dominance over IBM and operating systems, Walmart's rise past Kmart.